Also.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. I would like to call this meeting to order of the Providence School Board workshop meeting on October 9th at 4:44 p.m. We are meeting this evening to talk about agenda redesign. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. So we will move right into our working session tonight with the Council of Great City Schools. We have joining us via Zoom, AJ Craybill and Cindy Ellsburn. And take it away, friends. We are really excited to learn more about your guidance on redesigning our agenda to focus better on student outcomes.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for having us. So the idea behind what we're going to do today is first doing an agenda evaluation, just to get a sense of what your current agendas, where they are as far as their focus on student outcomes. As you journey toward becoming a more student outcomes focused board, once you've adopted goals and guardrails, we talk about the behaviors that boards can engage in that set the context for improving student outcomes, and that's setting priorities, which are your goals and guardrails, which you are underway in doing, and then monitoring progress toward those priorities, which is some of the work now that the administration is doing, is figuring out what those progress measures are going to be so that you can progress monitor. And then it's aligning resources. And there are a number of ways that boards align resources, one being how we spend our money, but the other being how we spend our time. So time, treasure, and talent. And the board's time is one together, your precious time together as a governing body, which is when you have the power, decision-making power, and it's critical then that time be aligned toward focusing on student outcomes. So the idea of agenda redesign is to, as I mentioned before, look at your agenda through that lens of what are we doing, how are we spending our time, is it student outcomes focused or is it not, those individual items, and then thinking about the items that are not student outcomes focused. Do we want to keep those, delete them, or modify them? And there's going to be things that you have to keep because the board's work is the priorities that you set through goals and guardrails, as well as anything that you're legally required to do. So some of that will fall within that legal requirement. And the other piece of that is once you understand the things that are valuable for the board to keep on their agenda, then it's also a matter of thinking about what is the ideal way that we organize those items that we're going to keep, so that we are making the main thing, and that we're communicating that to our staff, to each other, to the community. So the agenda redesign process encompasses those things. Looking at your agenda, scrutinizing it through that lens, and then making a determination of how you might reorganize whatever it is that is important enough to keep. Any questions before we proceed?
No questions.
Yeah. All right. And I will count on my colleague AJ to chime in whenever needed. Otherwise, we will just keep on keeping on. So what we have in front of us is the agenda from the 17th of September.
Yes.
And then also the completing a board agenda evaluation document.
And so what we'll do is, using section 2 of that board agenda evaluation document, is just go ahead and go through each item on the agenda. And starting with that very first line, no matter what it says, reading that out loud. And then what you'll want to do is answer the question, is this item student outcomes focused or not? And the way that you know whether or not it is student outcomes focused is if its entire purpose is to monitor progress relative to the board's adopted goals using a monitoring report on the timeline defined by the board's monitoring calendar. And then if as a result of that item, the board knows or can take away what current student progress is toward those goals. And then that is an item then that is likely to be student outcomes focused. And otherwise, it probably is not. So if we have an item that is student outcomes focused, great. If not, still okay, but then we're gonna answer the next question if it's not student outcomes focused, and that is, do you want to keep it, delete it, or modify it? So if it is something that you want to keep, articulate why is that important to keep. If it's deleted, then the question is there another way the board can receive the value of that information for that item without it happening during a board meeting? And then if it's to modify it, it's either modifying it to make it lean more towards being student outcomes focused, or if not, to be more efficiently handled. So that less time is handled on those things, or is taken handling those things that are not student outcomes focused, so that you can give more time to the items that are. What questions do you have about that process?
This is the same process we did with AJ already, right?
Yep.
Yep, it's the same process that we've already done. So I think if we can go through that with this agenda, just and I think that would be beneficial to revisit that both for everyone in the room as well as your viewing public, just to get a flavor for that. I'm getting that agenda back up in front of me. So looking at the regular, on the wrong one. So go ahead and start with the very first item on that agenda.
Okay, so our first item on the September 17th agenda was item, or the block of items 1.0 convene meeting, and that first item underneath that was 1.1 call to order and roll call.
So is this item student outcomes focused?
No.
No. So then the next question is, do you want to keep it, delete it, or modify it?
Well, 1.3 was student focus in September because Dr. Dillon did a real good job of making her comments aligned with student focused outcomes results. So I would say 1/3 of this was student focused. The first two were not.
Okay, so let's talk about then, let's take them one at a time then. Call to order and roll call, keep it, delete it, or modify it.
Keep, I think,
So call to order and roll call, they have to do.
yeah, I will say I think we have to do that.
So keep it, just because it's compliance, right?
Okay,
I would agree.
okay. And just,
And it takes about a minute,
sure,
minute and a half.
sure. Yep. And, okay, so call to order,
and roll call are a keep, so. Then the second item there, 1.2, Pledge of Allegiance. Student outcomes focused?
No.
No. Keep, delete, or modify?
I think the community overwhelmingly wants to keep it, so I will elevate the community's voice and say keep.
I would echo Meech's comments because there was some conversation after the previous time that we talked about the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think that there were community comments that indicated that it doesn't take up a lot of time and that potentially backlash from removing it would be more of a distraction than choosing to keep an extra 1 to 2 minutes of pledging.
Okay. So, I'll go ahead and note that you would like to keep that. 1.3, superintendent's comments. And think about this on the whole. Is it student outcomes focused? Sometimes. Which to be student outcomes focused, it's understanding whether or not where your students are in performance toward the goals.
I think prior to going through this agenda redesign the first time, they weren't. But since then, I think Dr. Dillon did a really good job of keeping her comments at least 80% to 90% focused on student outcomes. There's probably like a small percentage that are not focused on student outcomes.
All right. So it sounds like that there has been a redesign of the superintendent's comments to be more student outcomes focused. I think
I would say keep.
I'm still going to ask the question:
Yeah,
keep, delete, or modify.
I know I forgot that part. I would say keep if we're gonna stay with that kind of thread of keeping it student focused or connected to whatever the presentation will be later in the evening. Yeah, keep. I mean, what about you, Mel?
I think I'm gonna be devil's advocate and say that I'm not sure I would delete it, but I might modify it and ask that, ask our superintendent to focus the comments on any student outcomes updates that would not otherwise fall later in the agenda under specific presentations. Like I don't want to jump ahead here, but like there were student outcomes focused presentations later in the agenda. So I guess when I try to take it in a bubble, I think, well, if we're already getting student outcomes updates in other areas and we're monitoring that, some of the superintendent's comments are on things that aren't necessarily directly related to we have not yet adopted new goals and guardrails, but some of those are not. And so I guess I would mark this as a modify so that we could have a further conversation once we adopt our goals and guardrails. And once we have a clearer monitoring calendar based on the specific goals and guardrails we have, so that like my instinct is to say then perhaps, that could be if there's some sort of other topic update that is still around student outcomes, but maybe not the ones that are specific to our monitoring calendar, that the superintendent and the team feel strongly that the board needs to know and the public maybe need to know more immediately. I think we could also suggest that, sort of thinking about the deleting and modifying options within this evaluation, like even if there are items like that, do they need to be a spoken aloud piece during like item 1.0, or could those be submitted as a written memo that becomes part of our meeting record, but not, doesn't take up actual minutes and time of our.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are the kind of the types of discussions around modifications that I would encourage. So that might be something if you all are willing to note that, or if that's the route you want to go, to consider a modification around superintendent's comments being a mix of anything, sticking to things that are student outcomes focused, that are not about that the board and public might need to be aware of, that are not being monitored in that meeting per the board's monitoring calendar, which once you have that all set and adopted, and then discussion around is it sufficient such that other updates could be submitted in a written format as part of the record, and not take up meeting time. So those would be items that would be worth noting, I believe, if you all are in agreement on that. Does that sound reasonable to
Yeah, that
you?
sounds good, Miss Cindy.
She said yes, I'm not sure if you could hear.
I did, yeah, okay, got it.
I'm curious, from our superintendent team, what do you think about that?
I think it makes sense. So for example, if I were planning October 22nd's superintendent's comments, I would want to give the board an overview of the student outcome data from RICAS, knowing that we wouldn't be ready to do a full presentation on RICAS, but would want to give high-level student outcomes, especially in the areas that I know we will be monitoring. But I wouldn't want to go into, I forgot what we're doing for a presentation that night. I wouldn't want to go into that during the superintendent's comments, for sure. Right, whatever that other presentation is, like, off the top of my head, remember? Do you remember? Yeah. So yes, that's what, it's the beginning of the year data. So we're doing the beginning of the year data. We're not ready to go into RICAS because we've only had it for a couple of days, but I would want the board to know generally how we did across those topics, and I would give a brief update during the superintendent's comments on that. So you didn't have to wait till November. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me. Coaches, I'm curious, does that, or maybe this is for the end, does that sound like a reasonable way to handle that type of update? If we decide to keep it?
The information that you're talking about reporting on around RICAS is this still, are these still things that are required to report to the board for the TAP? Or is it?
We don't have anything like that has required topics in
Okay.
terms of RICAS. We have other things that we have to report on, which are not really student outcomes, like bullying data. But there's
Okay.
actually no requirement on student outcome data.
So, and I invite AJ to chime in here as well, but what I would encourage is to consider that once the board's goals and guardrails are adopted, these are the priorities of the board, and this is where they're going to focus their time. And typically, unless it's required, you might consider that if it's not required by law, that the board approve it, that the board get that information, any other student data that's not about goals and guardrails, that they receive it in a different way such that meeting time isn't spent on it.
just because, well, it takes focus, it prioritizes other things that aren't the goals that the board, adopts. AJ, do you have?
Yeah, you basically said the same thing I was going into, is that there's an inherent opportunity cost built into your school board time. That every minute spent on one thing is not spent on something else, and school board minutes are not infinite. There's a finite amount of time that you're going to meet each month. And so that's the thing to be thinking about, is every minute that we spend on thing X is a minute we're not spending on thing Y. And this is important because every minute we spend on thing X is a cultural message to our organization that this is more important than thing Y. So if we spend all of our time talking about, should we have apples or pears for lunch? And we don't spend any time talking about, is little AJ actually learning this week? Then the cultural message that sends, that use of time on debating apples versus pears, the message it sends is that's more important to the board. Adjudicating apples versus pears is more important to the board than having a conversation around, is little AJ actually learning, and what do we do to support his learning in the coming weeks. And so that's the thing that you want to constantly be mindful of, is this is at all times a cultural communication. Board meetings are a cultural communication to the organization. And in every moment you choose to spend time on thing X, you do that at the expense of spending time on thing Y. And the cultural message I send is that X is more important than Y. So the board can spend its time however it wants to. We just want you to be mindful of that inescapable reality. That we don't get to pretend that how the board uses time doesn't matter. It is a cultural message. It sends a cultural directive to the institution about what other staff should be focused on, what the community should be focused on, what parents and families should be focused on. So yeah, spend your time however you want. We're not going to tell you that you can't do this or you can't do that. That's not our job. You all public officials, we're not going to supplant your wisdom with our own. It is our job to make sure that you understand the consequences of your choices so that you choose something that you intend that matches with your values, and don't accidentally choose something that is a violation of your intentions and violation of your values. So as you're going through this agenda evaluation, this is really a culture setting activity. What is the cultural norm? What message do we want to send about what is most important? And how do we communicate that culturally through how we spend time? That's what you're doing here. So are there a bunch of really, really good things to spend time on that you will aggressively decline to spend time on? Yes. Like it could be really, really, really beneficial to spend time on should we have apples versus oranges. It could be really, really beneficial to spend time on should we have one ply toilet paper or two ply toilet paper. I mean, there's a lot of things that might be beneficial to spend time on. And you will willfully choose not to spend time on good things, even though they're good. So that's one of the things that you want to take away from this activity. Is just because something is something that's good to do and worthwhile, and there's value to it, doesn't automatically mean that you want to spend time on it. Because the set of all things that are good and valuable is this big, and the set of time that you all have is always this big. So you're always going to be saying no to good things. So don't think we'll just stop doing the bad thing and then everything will be great. No, you're actually going to have to ruthlessly say no to things that would be really good to say yes to, as a function of sending the cultural message that you intend.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because I think I got a little confused. So when I was talking about giving the report on the RICAS, if we land on the goals that we talked about Saturday, some of those goals, grade 3, 4, and 8, are directly connected to that. And so that's what I was referencing when I meant an update. Is that not correct, that we would do that?
And so the board would definitely spend time monitoring progress towards goals. And so any time spent on that is what we would say is spend half of your time monitoring progress toward the goals, the other half of your time doing everything else. And so that is something that would fit into this half, time spent monitoring our goals, if that's one of the goals. But then say the board doesn't adopt a goal around, underwater basketball, For some reason, you all aren't prioritizing underwater basketball as one of the things you want children to know or be able to do. And so there's a report that comes in about the percentage of the kids who are excelling in underwater basketball. You can still have that on the agenda. It just doesn't fit into this half of the meeting that's focused on your goals. It fits into this half. Now you've got to ask yourself the strategic question: is the conversation about underwater basketball more valuable use of the board's time than some of the other financial, fiduciary matters that we have to attend to, some of the other personnel matters, things of that nature? We only have two halves of the meeting. The half that's going to spend monitoring our goals, and the half that's spent on everything else. Is this thing, which is a good thing to spend time on, is it a better thing to spend time on relative to the other things that we have to fit into that other half? That's the challenge. That's the constant trade-off. And ideally, you all leave this meeting today with some type of insight, some type of recommendation for the larger board of what you all think those trade-offs should look like. And then you'll be having this conversation again with the larger board and say, hey, here's the trade-offs. And yeah, these are 10 good things that are really, really great things. We're still removing them, not because they aren't good, but just because they aren't alive. That's all.
That makes sense. That clarifies it.
I think,
And Dr. Dillon, I promise that AJ is not suggesting that you come up with interim metrics on underwater basketball.
Oh, I wrote that down though.
Oh, okay.
I think the challenge that Dr. Dillon was facing in answering that question was that until we have the goals, we're a little bit chicken and egg. And so, and I think it was a great question because right now what's guiding our district is the turnaround action plan or the TAP.
Yep.
But the TAP doesn't have clarity. It doesn't have that sort of monitoring calendar or clarity about report outs to the board. And so I think maybe where we just got stuck was in thinking about, does that specific model right now require a RICAS report to the board? Actually, no, even though it sounds like our tentative or draft goals would in fact require that at some point. So I think that's where we were getting a little muddled.
Yeah, because I was basing on what I figured, if we're moving sort of in the direction and we had agreement around kind of the idea around grades 3, 4, and 8, then we would be reporting on grades 3, 4, and 8 at the board meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, yeah, reporting on that as aligned to potential goals and potential monitoring calendar.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of get us a kick start even before we are fully in motion.
Then that is understandable. Okay. So that was discussion about superintendent comments, right? That's all good. It's all good.
2.0
All right.
is easy.
Okay, so 2.0 is really just one item. 2.1, approval of the agenda, which I believe we have to do procedurally.
Yeah.
And that is also a brief item. That's like 1 to 2 minutes total.
So, just for the sake of asking the question, student outcomes focused or not?
No.
Yeah, and so keep, delete, or modify.
Keep.
All right. Now the next item is, go ahead.
The next item is the consent agenda, which is handled as one big item or voted upon as one big item or takes up the time of one item. But in this particular consent agenda includes all sorts of different items. So should we go together through the items or no?
No, I think handling it as one item and I guess my question would be, the board indeed does handle it as one item and does the board make a habit of pulling items from the consent?
There have been times when they have pulled, as an example, Lisa was appointed on that particular evening and they called her up, introduced her and had her introduce herself.
Got it.
But for the most part, yeah, it's like super quick.
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, that is, I'm just gonna commend you all for using a consent agenda. Not every board does, and we,
It's
very
a
much.
recent development that we are leveraging the consent agenda. I think since we last met with you around the agenda, does that sound right?
Yeah, for handling handling any consent eligible items, we highly recommend that. And doesn't mean that board members can't, ask questions around it. We encourage them to get their questions in, to do their homework, such that it can be handled expeditiously. So consent agenda, keep, delete, modify. Well, first of all, is it student outcomes focused? No. And then keep, delete, modify. Keep.
And, well, I might even say modify to say to be rigorous and really hunt in our agenda for any items that can live there. And then I think if I can take one item out now as we're discussing around the school committee updates. So that is new to the consent agenda as of maybe August. Does that sound right? August or September? And so it had been our board's practice up until recently to allow for each committee chair to provide an update at the main meeting about business that had happened at recent committee meetings. And so the concept behind having this on the consent agenda is to provide written memos or a PDF under that item, such that if committee chairs are able to provide sort of a recap or an update of what happened at their committees, they don't have to do that out loud verbally during the meeting, taking up time, but that is still available in sort of one monthly place to sort of work toward that value of transparency and communication that we heard a lot from our community.
And so, you're looking that up as a, keep that in there as a transparent, okay.
Yeah, I think I'm just saying modify as a way to flag it to our board as a whole, to leverage that item. To be able to park things in there that we might want to make folks aware of, but that don't fit into our student outcomes focused presentations or other legally required business items. And then I'll also shout out to the superintendent's team and Dr. Dillon, because item 3.5 on this particular agenda, the memo to the school board from the school building committee, was a specific item that around our school construction and capital plans, that both allowed the district to provide lots of great updates to the board as well as the public via that item. So to me, that feels related to the modified item that we talked about in 1.3 of the superintendent's comments, because it's another way to sort of bring that information to the public and have it sort of highlighted as part of the agenda. I think, the meeting, I think you all said the meeting is a cultural communication of what we're trying to focus on, but the meeting agenda to me is also sort of a public statement of like, here's some other things. So I guess, is that a danger of having so many items on our agenda that maybe aren't that student outcomes focused? Is that a problem?
You're not spending a lot of time on it though.
What was that?
I said, but they didn't really spend
No, we
much
didn't
time
spend
on
time.
it, but it was made
So-
available.
So I think I would say the consent agenda, especially because it is part of the agenda, yet it is handled as one item, is a great place to handle even some of those, some of those items that the board has to approve that are still operational in matter, or in,
So some of the things that the superintendent might need approval on, yet they are inputs that, the board needs to approve, but does not select necessarily. And this isn't to say that the board can't have the information that they need to feel comfortable with those being on consent, or ask questions ahead on those items. But a consent agenda is, when used well, are a great way for the board to do its business, to have the items on record, to have the items there for the public to see, yet handle it in one bundled item. AJ, do you have anything to add on the idea of consent and how much, put as much as possible on there would be?
Yeah, so, our coach used to put everything that's legally allowable to be on consent to have it start there. And then if the board wants to, if board members want to pull things off, so be it. But actually default to having everything that can legally be on consent being there. So the default is, we're not going to spend time on items just because they're legally required. We'll spend time on items because board members say we should spend time on items. So instead of the legislature running your board meetings, it's the board running the board meetings. Is essentially the stance that we would have you take. That your job as a board isn't to represent the vision and values of the feds or the vision and values of the state. Your job is to represent the vision and values of your community. And so don't be led around by the feds, don't be led around by the state. Be driven by the vision and values of your community. And so put everything on the consent agenda as a default. And then as you all, as board members, so local representatives of the community say, hey, this is something that requires more focus, then have a system for pulling that off of consent and putting onto the regular agenda. But yeah, if you default to having everything that legally can go on consent and going there, then that will help free up some of your time and focus on the few things that the board most wants to focus on.
Yeah, and everything on the consent with the exception of goal monitoring. That we would say, don't put that on consent.
Never.
Ever, yeah. Clearly, because, yeah. If we're looking at 50% of the time.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions around item 3.0 consent agenda? Feeling good about that? Okay, so then item 4.0 is public comment, or 4.1 public comment right to be heard.
Student outcomes focused?
No.
No.
No. So keep, delete, or modify.
The only question that I have is, I know you're working on bylaws, but sometimes that can be hours, believe it or not. And so I just wonder about, like, the amount of time that the board should think about using for public comment. Yeah, it's just a wonder about how much time. It definitely needs to be there, it's required, but how much time should it be?
May I ask, what is the current process that you have for public comment? Do you have a sign-up process? Is it anybody who comes that evening can sign up? Do you have any time limits on speakers, anything like that? What is your current process?
Well, I have two answers for you. So
Yeah.
one is, what is the process as laid out in the current bylaws? And then what is practically what happens on the ground, or two different things?
Got it.
So I believe our bylaws designate up to 30 minutes of public comment, and that the board must vote to allow for additional public comment. I am not part of the bylaws committee, so I have to admit that I have not read them like in the last week to be prepared for this evening.
Ready. I'm not ready. I don't think they really got that to that level.
To that piece, yeah, okay. So, and then we have a process laid out on our district website underneath the school board page or pages, and that process requests that folks sign up in advance via email by 4 p.m. I'm looking at our board clerk who is off camera right now.
Yes.
By 4 p.m. To sign up in advance. Sometimes that creates technical difficulties, or sometimes people say that they've had technical difficulties to sign up. It has been common practice in the last few years to allow for folks to sign up in person once they arrive to the meeting, and every board chair I have seen in the last 5+ years also tends to accept additional public comment, ask the audience if there's anyone who didn't get a chance to sign up and provide comments. Our board clerk does keep and asks for people to limit to 3 minutes. I think the board has at various times voted in the moment when we have, 40, 50, 100 people present, asked for folks to keep it shorter than that. But generally speaking, public comment can vary anywhere from 0 or a handful of folks that show up to many, many, many people, depending on what might be happening within our community.
Sure.
And it's been up to 2.5, 3+ hours. And I guess I would say I want to modify this, but I don't know what the modification is, because both, it is not student outcomes focused, and our community wants to be heard. And I think the challenge for board members is also where this falls in the agenda. So because the public comment happens before any presentations, before any content, and before, you can see later in this agenda, we had a personnel or HR issue that we were required to handle. And then that means that we're not getting to some of these meatier data and legally required, potentially complicated issues until 9-10 p.m., which is not when everyone is at their freshest. I think I can speak for everyone and say that
Yeah,
we're
and
not.
it's really difficult to be able to go deep into the data and the student outcomes, or at that late hour when it's 2.5 hours after. So when we're starting with presentations around 8:30, or 9 o'clock at night, knowing that some of us are going to executive session that might last another 2 hours, it doesn't seem like good brain work is happening at that point.
So what I'm hearing is that it is a keep, but there is an appetite to modify, maybe in a couple ways. One by placement on the agenda, and another perhaps by way of amount of time spent. Did I hear that? Did I capture that accurately?
Yes.
I do not think we should change the placement of it. I don't think it should
We
come after
doesn't-
presentation.
Meesh doesn't think that it should come later, so.
I think time for sure.
But she
like-
agrees on time. Can you hear her?
Yeah, I think it helps to have
I'm sorry.
I can hear her now.
I
Yes,
just
I
wanna make
can
sure
hear you now.
everyone that
I can hear you now.
saying.
We're a phone commercial.
Tell us more.
Yeah,
No, yeah, I think the board has talked about this before extensively, and not wanting to have students, families, staff, like teachers that are in the schools waiting until the end of presentations to present. I think it was very clear that we felt like students who have school the next day that are there to kind of give public comment should be able to do that first so they can go home before presentations. So I want to just give a little pushback, or at least elevate that conversation has happened with board members, and a lot of board members felt that public comment should come before presentations. But I do agree with everyone else that half an hour, we need to stick to like a shorter time frame, because 2.5 hours of public comment definitely hinders the rest of the work that we have to do after public comment. So
Yeah, that's fair.
I think I will add though that I don't think the board has had a formal conversation in the context of a public meeting to discuss as a group and make a decision about the placement of it. So I
It
think
wasn't, but it was definitely a conversation that was had, and it was very passionately said that it should not be moved to the after presentation.
So one of the questions, I'm gonna go off script a little bit with the agenda evaluation since we're trying, and talk a little bit more about public comment. And my wondering is if you think about, especially if you think about some of those 3-hour sessions, some of those things where you get a lot of folks and end up spending a lot of time with public comment. Are the public comments about inputs, outputs, or outcomes?
I think it's a mix. And Miss Cindy, I believe if we change how public comments come in, like if they could categorize it like, oh, is this a face office comment? Is this a, you know what I mean? Like if when they're submitting their comment, whoever's checking those comments can put them into buckets and kind of, that's a lot of extra work on the district staff. I understand that. But I think it would allow us to not have as many people coming to us with like inputs, outputs, things that that the board can't directly kind of affect. I think we talked about this with AJ. I think leadership talked about this with AJ, but kind of changing how when people go on the website to submit comments, is there a way to categorize the comments and where those comments belong so that they might be able to get answered before the school board meeting even happens? Like if it has to go to family engagement office, or if it's something someone in the superintendent's office can answer. Some of the stuff is things that principals have to answer that we really don't even have no control of whatsoever. But I think that community doesn't feel like there's a lot of spaces for them to say what they feel, and school board meetings just end up being a place where they feel like it's accessible for them to come talk about different things, or they don't know where to bring their complaints. So they end up coming to the school board meetings.
I think that's true for some.
Yeah, not
We
all.
we rarely, I shouldn't say never, we rarely ever get people coming up about outcomes. Like, I can't remember in like 2 years, an outcome-based comment or question. I think some of it isn't question, it's really, so I think when we have those meetings, I'm not sure that it would be about directing to the appropriate resource for an answer, because when those meetings happen where they're super long, it's a passion-filled meeting about something that a group of people feel is a decision that they're not in favor with. So it might be a staffing decision, a school closing decision, so those types of things. So it wouldn't be like, we wouldn't send people to the principal or face when we do get those, but they're not the ones that turn the meetings to extremely long meetings. I would say the long meetings are when people have a passion about something. What do you think, so, Mish?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that even still, like when it I'll keep it to myself. I'll keep it to myself.
I like your idea of like helping people go when they are the question
Can I say
phase.
something? Okay, usually I'm the person who gets those
Mhm.
emails. And I have asked many a times to people, what is it in reference to?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like that question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They get hostile, they get very mad. They
Mhm.
tell me they're able to speak about whatever they want to, and we'll hear it when we get here.
Oh,
That's some of the responses that I've gotten.
wow.
So it's not that easy to try
To
to
try
get
to
people to
redirect.
tell you ahead of time what it is that they want to speak on when they don't even want to tell you so you can categorize it. So how are we supposed to do that?
No, I agree, Miss Martha, but I wonder if that's part of changing the culture. Like we have to bring the people along and educate them on like, this is why you're being asked this question. Like, I think it's part of how we're changing the whole culture of the school board, but I didn't know that happens, and I'm sorry that does happen to you. I believe it.
I try.
No. And that wasn't like a
No,
dig
no,
at
no,
you
I'm
at all.
saying
That
no,
wasn't
no.
meant to be a dig
No,
at
I didn't take
anybody
it
in
that way.
specific.
I didn't take it that way.
I just think that, yeah, I think with the redesign, as we're learning, I think we have to find a way to bring the community along so they understand that there are going to be changes. There is going to be a half an hour or whatever we decide allotted to public comment, and it has to be, you know, whatever that is. I think that re-education to the community piece is gonna be a key part in how to make all this work, whatever we decide to change it to.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, that it is about educating the community, and that this might be an iterative process as well, that, you take steps, take various steps. This might not be the absolute ideal agenda, for your, you know, that this might be a process that you go through 6 months again, you know, down the road again, as the community is more acclimated to how the board is changing the way they do business. And then you might, as you continue to educate, you might be able to continue taking steps with how that is dealt with or handled. But the idea about doing those different buckets, educating them that that's not about, that's about getting them to the point of service to actually, if they have an issue that needs to be dealt with, excuse me, without them having to attend a board meeting to get done or be heard. So I think what I'm hearing is that keeping it, modifying it perchance by way of holding to an amount of time, still having the discussion, is this where we want it to fall in our order of agenda? Sounds like there has been discussion, but as you're revisiting all of this together, again, just verify that that's where folks are still wanting it. And then also, making that, outlining that in your community education, the board's education to the community of that, of the various steps that you're taking. Does that capture what kind of the discussion that you all have had about this item? And then thinking about processes by which you can educate the community, help them understand why it is when they sign up, this is the information that we're going to ask you to provide, so that we are prepared so that we can either direct you to where you need to be, or that we know what, because the board meetings are the boards to do business in front of the public, not the public's meetings. So keeping that in mind, it does help the board do their business. So thinking about ways to make Martha's job a little more pleasant in collecting some of that information too. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I think also, Ms. Cindy, it's worth elevating. There are aspirations that the board, hopefully, each pair in each region will be hosting monthly meetings with the community. And I feel like when those are starting to happen, if everyone decides to come along with that, that will be another space where community can kind of bring those things to, versus a full board meeting where we're trying to be more student focused outcome. And maybe we're directing them to those monthly meetings in each region where, like, okay, this is probably a better space for you to be heard, and we can talk about, that's where the re-education will be happening. I mean, that's the aspirations that the leadership team is talking about, where we're bringing community along and doing workshops with the goals and reporting back information we get from the district, so that the community who don't make it to the school board meetings or otherwise can come along in that way. So just, I do feel like as we get into the process of kind of putting things in place, things might work themselves out a little bit, but.
It's a learning process.
Yeah. Okay, anything else on that? Communities right to be heard, our public's right to be heard. All right, the next one.
School board member updates, 5.0, 5.1. So at our September meeting, I believe we had 0 updates from any school board members. This is like a legacy item, I would describe it as, that this has been a board practice in the past. As a catch-all of like board members who want to say things that don't necessarily fall under like a committee update or a presentation question. Just describing that for y'all.
Okay, so, student outcomes focused, yes or no?
No.
And no, and so do you keep it, delete it, or modify it?
I say delete.
Yeah, I agree. It's
Delete.
redundant with the part under consent agenda now.
Right.
Yeah, I
So-
agree, because it often was off topic from items on the agenda, and I think
I think it's dangerous.
which is problematic legally, because then we're not holding to our open meetings rules, but also I think it has been used at times in a good spirit, to try to, particularly when it falls after public comment, it becomes sort of a response to public comment, which is also not ideal. And to Dr. Dillon's point, I agree. I think that if there are things that school board members want to update on, that they could, just like with the committee updates or other items that the superintendent might want to update, school board members could add something to the agenda under the consent agenda, conceivably, if they had something that they wanted to address that didn't fall under the other items or presentations. But I think we should delete it as its own separate item.
All right, so I think I heard a resounding delete there. Okay, and then the next item,
Presentations. So in September, we had items 6.1 and 6.2, access scores. That access is the MLL. I'm trying to think of the right, like it is the English language proficiency exam for our multilingual learners. And so that was the outcomes for students as measured by that tool. And then we had a foster care student outcomes presentation. So in September, both of these presentations were student outcomes focused.
Okay, student outcomes focused in the sense that they are around student outcomes. Just since you don't have goals yet, So, presentations, so would you delete either of these, keep them, modify?
I think I would say modify in the sense that this particular agenda that we're looking at for September, that these were specifically student outcomes focused. I think I would say modify moving forward, because that's not always been the case. There have been other items, and again, because we're operating without our goals yet, and based on the turnaround action plan, that some of those items that need to get updates. I guess I would want to go back and look more carefully, because there was some legislation around that dictates what types of things have to be monitored each year during the state intervention. And I believe that some of those items are not student outcomes focused. So we may need to get, but I don't know if some of those items could also go under consent agenda as
That's what
documents.
I was gonna say.
So we might want to
We
ask.
can do a report that has all of that in there and provide it as a report instead of a presentation. That is an option.
And there's nothing that I'm not aware of it, but you're not aware of anything, Dr. Dillon,
We
that,
have to monitor and we have to report on it. It doesn't say necessarily how. We
Okay.
report on it, just that we have to report on all of the elements and we have to do it quarterly.
So, yeah, so it sounds like that is an option to have that as a report, to potentially have it on consent, and then, of course, just make sure I's dotted, T's crossed, that that is all
Yeah, verify.
all we need to do. Yep,
Yeah, so I guess my only modification or note for that section is to, as we move forward, to ensure that our presentations are only on student outcomes.
I do have a question though.
Yeah.
So we have like the finance committee, the school building committee, and they do business and they have reports and they have presentations. In the past, what would happen is then those groups would come and then they would have a presentation at a school board. So under this model is how it works is the subcommittees of the school board do their work and then provide an update via the consent agenda to the larger board. Is that how that works, or am I, because I'm just wondering how the subcommittees that are making major decisions, right? Because right now we're doing all of the construction plans and how that gets from one to the other. Is it strictly through consent agenda, or is there something that we're missing here where there would be an open dialogue or presentation? I'm just not, how does the council see it?
so a couple things, so right now, how many committees does the board currently have?
It's like 6.
Well,
6?
the building committee is not actually a committee of the board. That is an intergovernmental committee that includes membership from other spaces. Like, it is not considered a school board committee.
Got it, and they're
Superintendent chairs it,
meeting,
and it includes folks from like city government as well as RIDE.
And then we have finance committee, which is a school board committee, policy committee, health and wellness committee, CTE committee. Is that all of them?
Those are all the standing committees right now. So we have 4 standing committees.
got it, and right now, the work that those committees are doing is to, for example, the CTE committee, what is their work?
They are working on like strategies to drive the CTE program forward, determining which programs expand, which programs we might be phasing out, funding.
And this is a board committee,
It
a
is.
committee of board members?
Well, it's the school board, committee member chairs it, and it has members from community and district on it.
Got it,
And same for health and wellness, that is also like convened and chaired by board members, but has other members. Whereas policy and finance committees are board members only. Like, we obviously have superintendent and superintendent team members present and presenting and discussing,
supporting.
but they are not voting members of those 2 committees.
And the health and wellness is legislative, so the legislation determines the membership of that one. So that, all 4 committees are a little bit different in their makeup and their purpose, yeah.
And the building committee that I mentioned, while that is intergovernmental, also has quite a bit of state law around it that talks about the membership and makeup and duties of that specific committee.
Yeah, so few things that I'll mention on committees. So, and this is something that we probably have I don't have your timeline in front of me, your implementation timeline. But one of the other processes, which doesn't help you in this moment on your agenda, that we will support is a committee diet. One of the things that we want that it's in the Student Outcomes Focused Governance Manual is that we recommend that board committees do board work. So any of the strategy, any of the programming, any of that is going to, those inputs are going to fall to the superintendent and team. So that would be one of the processes that we would look to do in the future. Like I said, I don't have your timeline to know when that's slated. And then the other thing is, and this is also going to be part of that, is understanding what the legal requirements really are. Because while legislature, and I can't speak to any of the committees that you've just mentioned, I don't have that legislation in front of me, but what I can speak to from working with other boards and having been on a board is that often, that what you might find is that while the district is required to have a committee, the board isn't necessarily required to have that committee. Or the board can delegate that committee to the superintendent to facilitate and do and get the advice, whatever that committee is set for. Because advising of superintendent work would be, we would advise that sit with the superintendent versus board members. For this, so that would be future focused. Currently, as it sits where your board is working through committees, I think, and AJ, please chime in, but I think what it sounds like is that there are some committees who will be bringing forward recommendations for board decision making. I think it might be a toss up between needing to be a discussion item, depending on what the item is, and or if it's consent eligible, and maybe what the idea is that you do put it on consent, and if the board believes it needs to be a more deeply discussed item, it gets pulled from consent. But the recommendation of the committee for the board to vote on whatever it needs to vote on could be a consent agenda item. If it's an update, that could definitely be a consent agenda item. AJ, do you have anything different?
No, I just see why you're struggling with this, Cindy, because the larger question about committees is, what do they actually exist to produce?
Right.
And if it's not clear what the committee exists to produce, it's not clear to me that they should have any time on the board's agenda. If they're just meeting to meet, then I don't see a huge value in that. If they're meeting to perform a specific function and to provide a specific deliverable that the board wants, then that makes perfect sense to me. But if folks are just meeting to meet, I would not give them any time on the agenda. And so I think the board needs to be thoughtful about what specifically do we want out of each of these committees? What is the deliverable? We don't want to just meet and just hang out and have a good time. Like, that's just wasting folks' time. Right? What specific thing are they going to deliver as a result of having met that the board actually needs? And if the board can't think of anything that it actually needs from a committee, then the committee probably just shouldn't exist. And so I think that's part of the struggle here is, the first question is, what does this committee exist to produce, and by when is that called to do? If there's not a specific deliverable, a specific deliverable due date, then it feels like we're just meeting to meet, and I wouldn't put that on the agenda. But if there is a specific deliverable and a specific due date for that deliverable, then that certainly makes sense to add to the agenda. But that's the struggle, that's the tension I'm hearing in this conversation. It's just, I'm not hearing a whole lot of clarity about why all these committees meet. I hear
that, and then the legal standing or requirement, is that, what is that, and what?
Yeah, but anytime somebody says, well, we do this business legally required, my first thought is show me the law.
Yeah.
And let's see what is actually required. Because there's been a whole lot of times people have told me something was legally required and it wasn't. That's just the way we've always done it. So people assume it was legally required. And then people say, oh, we're doing it because it's legally required. Then I'll read the law. And the law don't say nothing about what y'all do. So what it means is that there is something that has to happen by law, but it could happen in a dozen different ways. The way you're currently doing it probably isn't the way legally is required to be done. Okay, great. So then what is a different way we could do it that doesn't involve, blowing up the door's time? Is there a more efficient way we can get this done? And so anytime somebody says, oh, well, this is legally required, show me the law or I don't believe it. I'm just, by default, I don't believe anything is legally required unless you can show me the actual statute that says what is required. And then let's read that, and then let's make sure that we come up with a plan to follow the law, but that allows the board to focus its energy on honoring its community.
And then one question, so if it's determined that there is a committee that has this kind of value where the board is going to be weighing in on what the board's bringing forward, what the committee is bringing forward, do we need like an optional area on the agenda for discussion topics? So it's not a presentation, but the board's weighing in, they might even be voting on something. Like, should there be something here? Because that's the one thing I'm wondering about, are those things that might require more than a consent and might require the board to engage in a discussion before they act.
So for example, sometimes there's a policy recommendation that comes forward. And we would often recommend that a board discuss the policy in one meeting and then consider adopting an update. You basically do your thinking about something in one place, and then take your action in another place. That's a common thing that we recommend, is to separate deliberation from action, just so you can have some time to sleep things over and make sure, is this the wise thing that we want to do? And so would there be items on the agenda to say, yes, here is this item, and we're going to vote on this next month. This month, we're just going to talk about it. It's only for discussion, but we are going to vote on it next month. So anything you need to know about, get it out here, because it's going to be on the consent agenda next month, unless there's some significant reason why it needs to be on the regular agenda. And so this is the time to discuss it. So that is absolutely a normal phenomenon in a board meeting. But that wouldn't be something random that pops up that nobody know about. That would be planned. We put it on the agenda for this month to discuss, knowing that we're going to put it on the agenda next month to vote on. So would I encourage folks to be like, hey, let's just have some random time on here so we can talk about whatever we talk about? Nah, I'm messing with all that. Like let's be more deliberate, let's be more intentional. But yeah, there is time that you really do just want to set aside for the board to just deliberate and discuss on the merits of things and make a decision as a group of public officials. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the challenge for us a little bit is that the agenda format mostly looks the same from month to month, but sometimes there are things that only happen once in a while or once a year, so they may not be all reflected. Every single possible category might not necessarily be in the sample that we're looking at from September.
Sure.
So
So you might have a section that is discussion items
discussion
on
items.
a different agenda.
That answers my question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And items I've seen in that category would either be things like policy that is
Needs a
gonna be,
reading and
that needs a
discussion.
reading and discussion, and or every so often finance items, but often those can go in consent agenda as well.
Yeah, that's another perfect example. Like it's not uncommon for a board to say, hey, we're going to vote on the budget in 2 months, but this month we're going to have this conversation about the budget and look at this specific slice of it. Is it aligned to our goals? Next month we're going to look at this particular slice of it. Is it honoring our guardrails? And then the following month we're going to vote. So you'd actually have 2 separate conversations lined up to talk about this item in advance of a vote still 3 months out. And so things like that are not unusual. They can be categorized. You can plan for these so that they shouldn't be coming out blue. Like if people are acting like it's something brand new, it ain't a whole lot brand new. People be acting brand new, but that doesn't mean any of the items. And so what there's to do is just like, let's be deliberate about this. Let's come up with a plan. Because the problem is if you hear me kind of pushing back on anything that kind of has stuff come up at the last minute or anything like that, the problem is that always accrues to the benefit of the most privileged in your community and accrues to the harm of your least privileged in your community. stuff that pops up at the last minute that could have been planned for is basically a way of saying, look, if you have the privilege and wherewithal that you can make it down to the board meeting and advocate for this, and if your board members, if you don't have, you have a more flexible job. Like the moment stuff is coming up at the last second, people who are in an economic position to be able to be flexible with that, now are at an advantage over people who are not. And that's true for both board members and community members. And so kind of surprising people, kind of coming up with stuff on the slick, like that's just not something we recommend. Because then we get to this point where we are actively saying there are those with privilege and we're going to give them a place of special, we're going to extend that privilege into the boardroom. And our argument would be don't behave that way. And so the more thoughtful and planful and convenience the stuff is known in advance. Schools are real cyclical. Like y'all had third graders last year. I bet you more than you're gonna have some third graders next year. And so this is cyclical stuff. This is stuff that we can plan for. And so the benefit of that planning isn't just because there's some rule that you should follow or some school board nerds on Zoom said so. The benefit of being planful about this is it actually frees up both board members and community members who don't have equal access to financial resources to be able to move on a dime and still protect their families, to still be full participants in the process. And the more lasting that you become, the more those are the people whose voices you that you infringe upon. So that is what I would encourage to be in the back of your mind. Anytime you're thinking, hey, can we just do this on the fly? Just know that there are people that will benefit and there are people who don't harm. That's all.
This was helpful, thank you.
And as AJ is talking about that, even those types of things, like those budget conversations that you know when they're going to happen and year over year, those things can be slotted into the monitoring calendar as well. Just, your board self-evaluations, the superintendent, all of those things that you know are the cyclical things that the board needs to attend to, then that also can be added to your monitoring calendar, just so it is that ultimate agenda plan.
I really like that suggestion actually, because I think the budget's a good example because that sort of goes on a predictable timeline cycle. And I think what has happened before is that if there isn't this wider long-term monitoring calendar, then it's like, oh dip, we also have to talk about these other student outcomes. And now we have like 4 presentations unrelated to each other all on the same night. And also this thing happened and the community is mad and we have 2 hours of public comment. And also we have this like executive session item and now we're here for 7 hours and everyone is.
I like
Yeah,
the way
well, no,
that-
I'll give you another example.
And I like the way you broke it down because the budget presentations I always thought were really challenging, right? Even though I know the budget intimately, when I look at it and I sit there, I'm always thinking, I know this and it's challenging. So if somebody's only hearing this once, I can imagine that they might feel like they never heard it. So I really appreciated the idea of talking about the budget twice before voting, once from the lens of the goals and once from the lens of the guardrails. I think that's brilliant.
Well, and another example of kind of just the board using its monitoring calendar to kind of dictate when stuff is happening throughout the year. In another district, I knew this was coming, and so I said, let me put y'all on game right quick. Here's what you need to do. Put on your monitoring calendar. This is the latest date in the school year that the superintendent is allowed to bring us a recommendation to close schools for the following school year. And so in this case, it's October. It said, look, if we don't have a full plan in October of 2025 for which schools close in August of 2026, then closures in August of 2026 are off the table. You can bring us something about August of 2027, but you got to give us a full plan basically a year in advance. And if we don't vote on it by this date, then the answer is automatically no. Don't even bother bringing it back to show up in April. How about we go close something in August? Like, try some business like that. Like, just don't do that. But the way the board manage that is they just remove the whole conversation by putting it on the monitoring calendar and saying, this is the last possible date that we will ever consider this. And if we don't have it by this date, that's fine. We're not mad about that. It just means that now Anything related to that for 2026 is out. Now we're a whole another year out. And so the superintendent rolled up, thinking the board was playing, and said, hey, I want the board to vote on this in November. The board's like, we ain't voted on it. Like, if we don't vote on it in October, then they talked to us about 2027. And she's like, I can't get it together. It's like, all right, well, in 2027 it is. And so by the board having that on the calendar, it clarified for the administration, look, you ain't gonna last minute nothing for us. Like, if this is gonna have a huge impact for the community, like, community has a right to know as far out in advance as is appropriate for any given item. If it's something like boundary changes, like, you want people to know boundary changes way out in advance. You don't want to sneak up on people with that. And so that's also on their monitoring calendar. Here's the latest date you can bring us boundary change recommendations. If you don't have it by this, then boundaries ain't changing next year. Now, maybe the year after next, but not next year. And so that's just another way you can think about using your monitoring calendar as a way to really help set the cyclical pace of when decisions are
Secretary Fonz, any other comments on that, or should we move to the next item?
I'm good.
So the next item on our September agenda was 7.0 executive session. And there were, we had one executive session item around an employment or HR issue. And we are legally required to have that item.
So executive session is an as-needed item for when things that are executive session.
Yes, most often personnel issues, but occasionally other.
Things that are
School
maybe
safety or like, yes, closed, it's a closed session for board members and select members of, and council and select members of the PPST superintendent's team, depending on what the item is.
Got it. And then,
And those vary in length. And do those count, sorry, just a question again, does the time length of it counts for my mind and my soul when I'm participating in them, but do they count toward the?
yes,
Okay.
it counts for your mind and soul. It does not count toward the minutes. The executive sessions do not get counted in the board in when we're looking at why can't I am not yeah, when we're looking at the amount of time boards spend in public meetings, that is a time that time is exempt from the count.
So keep that one.
Yeah, keep that one.
It is not student outcomes focused, I can tell you that.
Right, yeah.
You have to do it.
And then you would be required to vote when you come out, it looks like,
Yes.
if there is a vote.
Yes,
You
there's
take
supposed to be, like a
A
vote
report.
where they go, by each of the members and how they voted.
Got it. All right, so 7 and 8 are the as-needed executive session items that you will keep and use only when needed, it sounds like. And they do not count toward yours, for or against your student outcome minutes. And then the last item, adjourn. Student outcomes focused?
No.
Keep, delete, or modify.
We would like to adjourn, sweet.
Yeah, I think you need to delete it and you need to start always session.
Perpetual board meeting.
Professional board meeting. All right, so now you have an idea. So I only heard one thing that went for the delete, which was the board member reports or
Updates.
comment. Yeah, and then updates, yep. And then there were some modifications that you want to talk through. And you want to leverage the consent agenda, talk about public comment and starting to make some shifts with that and what those might look like. The presentation section, that, going, shifting as you get the goals adapted toward those, where those goal presentation or the goal, monitoring discussions and monitoring report discussions will happen. Executive session as needed, adjourn. So as you look at that and think about, you're probably gonna convene the meeting at the beginning, adjourn the meeting at the end. But when you're looking at the order of business, is there anything that you would modify as far as, if you recall when we met on July 31st and did the orientation workshop, we did an activity around the ideal agenda. If you wanted to communicate an agenda that was, radically focused on student outcomes, what would be on it, which you've decided now, but what order would that be in to support that student outcomes focus?
The one, item that we talked about though, that, wasn't on was the, when we need to have discussion items.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So discussion items maybe would be a placeholder somewhere then in that mix, of items.
If I look at I pulled up some previous agenda, I think this one was from June. I think in past meetings, those discussion items would typically probably be before presentations.
Okay,
Like that is sort of the rough order of where that would have fallen if there were discussion items on this agenda.
and those discussion items typically would not be the student outcome items, but the items that rise to the level of meeting discussion such that you're going to vote on them in a future meeting. You mentioned policy, budget, different things like that.
Yes.
Is there a different order that, thinking about that and that, so essentially discussion items, if we're looking at this agenda, you would cross out school board member updates, and that's where the discussion items would sit in this agenda. Yeah, so thinking about it that way, is there any order of business, different order of business that you would recommend, or that you think would be ideal to, as AJ mentioned, this is a culture, board meetings are culture setting, monitoring is culture setting, monitoring conversations are culture setting, speaking, how you spend your time and the order in which you spend it, communicates something. So what is it that you would recommend the board communicates through their order of business?
From, other communities and what you're aware of, I'm curious, so sometimes a lot of the public comment might be around whatever that discussion topic is. Do you recommend that the board discusses that topic before public comment so the public can hear what's being discussed? Or that it comes after public comment? Is there a best practice?
Typically, typically what I've seen is that the public comment comes prior to the board discussing. But it is, so often what I see is that if a community member is coming to speak toward an agenda item, then that public comment happens when that agenda item is brought forward for discussion. But that isn't.
Let me
So you
finish
take
real
them
quick.
for it.
This is so varied. So first, your question is there best practice? I would say no. So what we did a few years ago is we kept getting this question, and so we actually put out a survey. And so what we can send you is a spreadsheet. I think it's like 35 different districts in the council that all shared what do we do with public comment. Of those 35, guess how many of them are in?
Oh, wow, okay, so
like best practice.
No, it's all over the place. And so we can send you that spreadsheet, and then you can look at that yourself, and you can see all the different things that all the different people do and all the different variety. And really it's about what makes sense for our community, what makes sense for us.
Okay.
But then at least you'll have a bunch of ideas to go from.
AJ, are there some areas though where public comment is, laid out in statute around?
Yes, and that statute is included in the spreadsheet. Links to the statute is included in the spreadsheet. You have some that they do all the comments in advance, some do it after, some do it in line with each individual item. Some people are, even ones that are on board items, those have at the beginning of meetings, and even ones that are not on board items are at the end of the, I mean, it's an endless array. I've got some districts where the students are allowed to speak at the very beginning of the meeting, and then everybody else speaks later on.
Yeah.
There's everything out there.
Wow, okay.
So yeah, thanks AJ. I forgot about that survey. Yeah, so, sounds like we can provide you with some food for thought on how you might consider that.
Yes, I mean, really, it's up to the board. I just had that one question.
I was really hoping you were gonna have a different answer about that there was some magical solution that communities love everywhere. That's not a thing.
Mish, what do you think about the order of, and do you see anything needing to move it into a different order?
I wonder if superintendent comments could go right before presentations, or does it feel like it should still be at the top of the meeting? Just to keep kind of the student focused outcome stuff together.
Superintendent comments go where?
Right before the
I missed
presentation,
Presentations.
that would be my only suggestion if there was something to change.
Given that the presentations are going to be from the superintendent or some designee of the superintendent presenting about student outcomes. So is that duplicative to have those comments in the beginning if things that are not student outcomes focused would go under the consent agenda as a report anyway? That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. I love it. Can you think, Dr. Dillon, of how that would feel, or if there's a
I mean, I've seen, and I've been in, on boards that have done that different ways. So superintendent's comments are usually in the beginning in most of them, but are very different in approach. So on some of the boards that I've been on, it's more of a celebration, or something that the superintendent wants to make sure is like, has a highlight or a focus. And others, it's more about what would be like that memo and the consent. So I've seen it a lot of different ways. I think it's really what the board would like to see. I think they all work, similar to the question about public comment, but I think it's based upon what the board would want based upon the community.
Yeah, and I think you're right that there are probably numerous ways that happens. I've also seen boards that the superintendent makes any additional comments at the end of the meeting before adjournment. And so I think that is a decision that you all have to make, and then again, thinking about any modifications to what the superintendent's comments are about and what is going to rise to the occasion of being said versus being put in a memo, file and receive, or consent agenda. One thing I will throw out there for also food for thought is as you're thinking about the culture setting, piece of this, and as well as the education piece of this for the community, is that, if you're also wanting your community to follow your progress monitoring, also thinking about their bandwidth, and, where in the agenda would it be ideal so that, your community is also investing the time that you're investing in monitoring student outcomes, and they're watching those and following along as well. That is, again, a board decision, but something to think about.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that there's a possibility that, if a lot of business comes before the, dive into the outcomes, people might turn off and tune out at that point in the agenda.
They do, and typically members of the public often leave after they provide public comment. So that is one thing that I would ask us to consider as a full board and have a conversation about it, because if we are trying to help make clearer progress on student outcomes, that's going to be difficult to do, I think, sometimes if the presentations around the student outcomes are not happening and the progress monitoring isn't happening until hours into the meeting. Again, that's a challenge. Like in the September meeting, I think we had 1 or 0 public comments. So
Yeah,
like
so
I was
it's
saying
fine.
that theoretically, but like what actually happened in the September meeting was, I think our presentation started by, the meeting started at 6, and I want to say by
It was quick.
6:20, 6:30,
You
definitely.
were already there.
We were already there, which is great, but like, I think it's that being, I don't know, I guess I will just offer as a general comment or concern or like thing to think about, like, it's important to have consistency, but it's also important to be nimble and responsive, I think, to like, if we know that an agenda, like if something comes up and that's gonna be, I don't know, I think that's just the sticky widget with public comment, or how it's happened in the last few years in Providence, is that it really, really varies in length. And so that just makes a difference, because it doesn't, like if items are on the agenda, they're there hopefully for a reason, and definitely now moving forward, they're there for a reason. So how do we meet both of those needs at the same time?
I have 2 thoughts, and both apply to Misha's comments. I think she was very clear on, it might be about the amount of time for public comment as getting more defined in that, however that the board decides to define that. And then I was thinking about moving the superintendent's comments down, and I was thinking that first, like, oh, that's a great idea. But if we moved it down and there was a lot of public comment and people didn't stay for the presentations, then they wouldn't have heard anything about student outcomes all night. So that's the only thing.
Miss Cindy,
Yeah.
is the monitoring of the goals the same as the presentations? Like the board monitoring, are those 2 separate things? Are those the same?
Well, what I'm hearing is that the presentations would become the progress monitoring section.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dr.
and
Dillon,
then,
I hear that concern. I hear that.
and the other thing, and like AJ said, we'll send you things that are, that spreadsheet with how various boards do their public comment. As I'm thinking about it, like, some boards have chosen, well, I'll say I was a former board member. We would have a 30 minutes ahead of the meeting, we would have a public forum open to anybody who wanted to come speak to an item that was not on the agenda. That was where that was where we heard that, but we had a hard stop time because our business meeting started at that point in time, I believe it was 5:30 was public comment and 6 o'clock was start of our business meeting. And then, during the business meeting was when speaking to agenda items happened, with a time limit. So there's a whole lot of ways that you can slice and dice to, but it might take a shift also, like in when you, you might want to shift some time that way, so, that too would need to be a discussion, that would be a change for all of you too. But there are various ways to figure a whole lots of ways that you could work with, so that your community gets what they need to feel heard, to be heard, and that keeps the main thing, and also gets everyone home, gets everyone doing the business when their brains are still at a functional level and home at a decent time.
I wouldn't be opposed if we did like school-age kids before presentations, then do presentations, and then have adults give public comment after presentations. My concern, and I think the concern I heard from other board members, was students in this specific meeting were waiting a very long time in an undesirable location. They wasn't even up here, they was in the basement. And so we was more so worried about students who had to get up for school the next day, waiting until the end of the night, giving public comment. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing like youth public comment presentations and then adult public comment like after presentation, just elevating that. I'm not opposed to that. I don't know how people will feel about 2 separate public comments, but we're the ones who are making the agenda. It's not.
Yeah.
And if you don't have students that evening, then it just
goes straight to presentations, and then adults can comment after.
I think that's a possibility. I would just offer, we also sometimes get parents with small children, so like.
Maybe students and
Yeah,
parents.
figuring out what that category is.
Yeah.
But potentially having like I think it's that, and I think to Martha's earlier point, like I think, it would be helpful if we had some sort of voluntary sorting mechanism so that when people are signing up for public comment, we know like this is a student or this is a parent, or this is a staff
community
member,
member.
this is,
Yeah.
for example, like a community member that may or may not live in Providence, like that, those are different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did you all feel about how Cindy's school board did it, where it was like a half an hour of public forum before the meeting began around topics unrelated to the school board agenda, and then public comment during the meeting regarding items that are on the agenda? I thought that
We
was
also have a
interesting.
sign-up process, but yeah, I'm not saying that that's a recommended way or it's just
how
a
others
way.
are feeling about it. Because like some of, when this happens, when we have a lot of people, it tends to be around one thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not typically an item on the agenda, so a forum seemed like an interesting way to think about it.
Sometimes public comment is just redundant. They all repeat each other, and it's always like, one builds off of the other, it's always like the same thing. I mean, it's not like we have 2 hours of public comment and everyone spoke about something different. Most of the public comments, right, are the same, they're just reiterating what the other people are saying.
And one other question, just throwing this out there, do you all have a mechanism where if people, as part of your public comment, we're not gonna make it to the board meeting, but here is our written comment for the record?
Yeah.
Yes, folks can submit via email, via the board services email, and then Ms. Martha will share that with everyone, or sometimes folks email us directly as board members.
Okay.
Dr. Dillon, I'm not opposed to that. I think if we could put that / student, like, like I'm worried about our young people getting pushed under the presentations and it being
Yeah,
late.
that's why I was wondering about like the.
So I'm not
Kinda
opposed to that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like this is a topic that we need more
Input
more
on.
brainstorming and like a bigger group discussion
For
to try
sure.
to sort
Yeah.
out some possibilities.
For sure.
I hadn't heard that one, that was interesting.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful if you share with us that spreadsheet that you talked about, even if it sounds a little like all over the place. I think it could help sort of think out
Help us, our
different
brains
kinds of
think.
ideas. And I know that I think we're at about time right now, or at least the time that I'm gonna have to. I have a hard stop at 6:35. But is there anything else? Like, what are our next steps now? I know next steps from me as the person who's facilitating this particular meeting or this particular ad hoc committee around agenda redesign. I will be preparing a short memo that I will include in the consent agenda on our next meeting about agendas. So that's a little bit meta, but and I'll share it with the board ahead of time. But like that is the plan that I have as like chairing this group to be able to report out from our conversation today to the public again via that space.
And we're happy to work with you with that memo, and doing a review, see if there's anything that we can help bolster in there for you.
Amazing, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then were there outlines of was there, an expectation of recommendations for the board to keep, delete, or modify, as a redesigned agenda? Was that the deliverable by a certain date? Or is part of your, the other piece of that, if that is where you believe you all are at, or if your recommendation is what I heard is more brainstorming around various things, if it's beneficial for the entire, for more board members to go through the process to understand the rationale, that's something we can support as well.
We did the training before, but I think there were just a couple of buckets on here that you need board discussion on, right?
Melissa, would it be helpful for me to make a spreadsheet kind of like with the overarching kind of things here and like have the board members like put their names up top and they can do the keep, delete, modify so it can all be in one spreadsheet and we can see.
Rolling quorum, we can't.
That's a rolling
Yeah,
quorum.
a meeting.
A document?
Yeah,
That's dumb.
but you could decide that pretty much you are all on the same thing on some of the easier ones, and these are the ones we want to bring to full board for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
That's allowable.
Right, I think what I was thinking is that I could start a memo that laid out the things that we decided. And then the things that are still up for discussion. And I believe President Stevens requested that this group via me provide a recommendation by the 15th, which is next Wednesday, with the thought that if something needs to be on the agenda for the 22nd, that would provide ample time for board leadership to be able to discuss like how that will fall onto the agenda on the 22nd. But for transparency, my plan would be to have that memo also be available within the agenda, even if we're not necessarily discussed. That would be my recommendation would be to have the recommendations from here within the consent agenda. And then if there are other pieces, I think that's up to board leadership to decide. And then I think at that point, then we'd need to decide if we need to meet again with all of you and or as part of our regular board meeting to be able to have a wider discussion about particular items. It feels like, at least based on this, that like there's definitely some more conversation to be had around options for public comment and how to maximize that and leverage it so that it's more efficient and serving our community better by allowing our community to be heard and seen and feel heard, while also being efficient and keeping in mind, I think that's a good reminder. AJ said, like, a board meeting is the board doing its business in public, not necessarily doing business with the public. Is that a fair?
Yeah, Or doing business, before the public, not the public, Yes, I'm not even gonna try to repeat that, but yes, you got that pretty accurately.
Okay, so do we have any other things we need to discuss tonight? Coaching team,
I will, we'll get that, spreadsheet sent to you after we close out this meeting, and then, just keep us posted on whatever support you need with that memo, and then whatever next steps come from that.
so at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Our meeting is adjourned at 6:34 p.m. on Thursday, October 9th. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, coaches.
Thank you, have a good evening, get better, Mish.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Here's my